Hi and welcome back to the Building with RescriptRelay video series. In this episode we're going to cover kind of route transitions and continue where we left off, trying to make moving between this little thing here to a new user profile as sweet as we can, and explain kind of how Relay deals with rendering data that already exists in the cache while waiting for data from the network to come in. How you can work with suspense to tailor kind of how you want the loading experience for each route to be. And then also how you can use some pretty nice React and Relay browser tooling to work with suspense and Relay in itself, and in order to speed up the process, essentially. Okay, so what we are going to do now is we are going to kind of dissect this interaction from going between here, going from this profile to this profile. And we're going to do that with our network slowed down. So we'll put this on 3G. Now, by default, as far as we've gotten so far, if I click here, you can see that nothing happens. It waits for the route to finish before rendering. And that's dependent on this thing, right? It getting the data. Because it needs to get all of the data here in order for it to be able to render the entire view, right? So a little bit background about that is that Relay, when we go into, let's take the user profile, this one that we're rendering right here. When we go in, when we render this component, I'm going to assume that you understand a little bit of suspense, essentially. If you don't, pause this video and go search for React suspense and read up a little bit just on it so you understand the concepts, because suspense is at the heart of Relay's loading experience. So it's very good to kind of understand how that works. So what's going to happen here is, if we start from the route level, the router, user file route renderer, as the router gets the queue to render this route, which is when this loads, it'll first call prepare code and prepare at the same time, which will start loading the code for the route we're going to render and then loading the data for the route that we're going to render. Then right away, it's going to try and render this code split component and pass it the query ref that it gets from initiating the load of this query. That's important. Nothing in this step is going to wait for this query to finish. And nothing in this step is going to wait for neither the code or the query data to finish before attempting to render. And that's the render as you fetch pattern that you've probably heard about before, coming from React. So it'll try and render the code split data and the code split component, and then also using the data that might or might not be there. When we come in here, I'm going to go ahead and remove this one, right? When we come in here, it's going to go in here and see if it can. This data, this just contains the node and stuff. So if we make it all the way down here, it's going to pass along this data. So even if the data doesn't exist for user avatar yet, or user title, or user badges, or any of the other components, it's going to pass along the fragment refs. And the fragment refs aren't real data. They are just keys to get the data. So that means that Relay is going to let the user avatar try and render, let user title try and render, and so on, all of these components. And this in itself, when it comes down here to the fragment.use hook, where it has the fragment key and it tries to exchange it for data, in this step, if all of this data is not already available in the cache, in the local store, it's going to suspend. So suspension happens here. That means, and the same goes for this one, like if you call user.use, it's going to suspend over here. If you call user badges, this one, fragment.use, it suspends here. This means that we have many opportunities here to catch these suspenses if we want to, with suspense boundaries. Now, one very important thing to understand with Relay is that this works as long as Relay can reach whatever it is you're trying to render. So if relay doesn't understand what node is and that node might already exist in your local cache, it would suspend right away at the query because this data would not exist. But given that node is special treated, like the node interface is special treated in relay, it can look up nodes from the cache using the ID. And this is why we're using the node interface for this view and why we're passing it the ID and pulling the IDs up in the URL as well, so that relay can potentially reuse the cache. So what's going to happen here is relay is going to try and render this query. Even though we've never fetched the user via the node interface before, it's going to go and have a look. Okay, do I have a node in the cache with this ID? Oh, I do. Cool. Send that back. Oh, it's a user. Cool. This matches now then. And it has an ID. So nothing here suspends. Instead, these other components might suspend. And what's going to happen when we move from this view to a new view is it's going to suspend because it doesn't have all of the data for this view. But rather for the user profile, but it's the same data requirements. But the interesting part is that it does have quite a lot of data that it could potentially render. And I'm going to show you how to see that. So I've installed both the Relay and the React browser extensions. If I go into the Relay browser extension, I get to see, let's see if I can reload here to have a fresh start. Reload. It's sometimes pretty slow with how it's. Go over here. Cool. There we go. Okay, cool. Now we get to see inside of the store. And as you can see here we see all of the things saved in our store. The local cache. And if we click this one, the user, you can see that this is indeed me. Gabriel, login, CTH, and so on. So we have a bunch of data for this user. But if we move along down here to these things, which are the next ones, you can see that we have some data, we don't have all of it. We have the avatar URL because we're using that. We have the ID because that's always saved by Relay as well. We have the login and the name because we use those for the hover here. So what I want to do is I want to show you that you can, because this data already exists in the cache, you can get around this experience that we have now, where if I click this user, it needs to load everything fully before it can show the view, because it wants to show everything here. I want to show you that you could render this view with the avatar and name and stuff without rendering these things, just because you already have all of that data, right? So you could transition to that view and then wait for the data while showing the data you already have, which is pretty cool. So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to create a couple of suspense boundaries here. Oh, remove the 3G. So if I wrap these, React.suspense, React.suspense, and call it fallback, React.nullerite, no, that's not it. React.element. All right, yeah, exactly. It's not a function that you do that. Do this and then do the same thing for these things. Go wrap every single thing here. We go. What will happen if I see if this works? If I now go to 3G and I press this, see, it already renders, although it's waiting for data. So it was now able to render in this view with the data that already exists. And then it'll get new fresh data for that back and re-render if the data has changed, but you can show a lot of the view right away. And that makes the experience quite nice, because now you immediately transition to the new thing and then wait. But of course, it's pretty jumpy here. So in the real world, what you do is you would extend this to kind of, let's go back here, to to show something a little bit more fancy. So for instance, here you could do a div dot orange 200 animate pools, rounded MD, and maybe a height 4 and width, say 24 for the user badges. And then switch over to 3G, jump over here, and you can see that we have a small, simple little skeleton over here. And you'd kind of tailor your view to show these loading states if you want to. Now, one thing I'm going to show you here is that this can be a little bit cumbersome, right? To jump between views and slow down things. So in the React tooling, there's actually a way to go in here and say that I want to see how this looks when it's suspended. See? So we suspended on the title. We know that the title is going to disappear because we haven't done anything yet here for it. So we'll go ahead and do the same kind of thing here, but we'll do a kind of a two-parter here. We have 2 here. We know that this one's going to be slightly higher, or actually this one's going to be quite a lot smaller usually. So maybe half of it. We go back in here, we see the user title, we say suspend, and we can see how it looks. Looks terrible. So we'll go ahead and do justify center, flex call, space Y1, maybe like that, something. User title, suspend, cool. I guess I got that one wrong, I always do. We'll throw the kitchen sink at it, take every single one we have. User title. Yeah, pretty nice. That looks okay. So we have that. We'll go move on and we'll do the badges. Oh, we already did the badges, sorry. We'll do the title, the bio. That's going to look similar here. Just we don't need to center anything, right? It's going to look like text. We'll do user bio. Go ahead and suspend. Looks like that. That's fine. And then for the kind of follower widget, we're going to do just a single one here, but slightly larger. We know our avatars are usually around 12, right? So we'll do height 12, width 24. That'll be good. Followers, suspend. Looks okay, but still like, I'm not going to spend too much time on trying to make this look super good, but you know that you understand the principle. Good, self-centered. So if we now go back and check the experience, we do 3G, or rather actually we gotta reload here. 3G, we got a fresh one of these in, we press in, we'll immediate transition, and we have a few skeletons set up. We continue, we go there. Great, works. And we can just continue going here. And this is going to, this is a very important technique because this, like, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Like, you could remove all of these suspense boundaries to have the view render only when the data's ready, or you could split the view up in several suspense boundaries, have some of the components required to be loaded before showing the rest of them. For instance, so if you, like, it all depends on what you want to do. Maybe this is a view where you don't want to show anything before it's all ready, and so on. But this is an important technique, and it's important to understand how Relay works, where Relay suspends and why it suspends, so you can use that to your benefit. So in a future video, a little while longer along the series, I'm going to show you how you can kind of, for instance, add a nav bar or other Chrome around your app, layouts and stuff, which requires data, but where you want to render as much of the data as possible, as much of the view as possible before, without having to wait for the data. So a canonical example is, for instance, if you have a nav bar where all of the nav items are known without having to ask for any data from the server, but you have a kind of a notifications bar, and you don't want to have to wait for the notifications to come in order for it to work, but you might have other things in the layout where you also want to load stuff, so splitting them up to separate queries aren't always like a good idea. So this is an important technique to remember. So to recap, we are using the node interface here. It's because Relay automatically understands the node interface and can look in its cache for any node with ID and can figure out the type of it. So this thing, if the user with ID blah 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 exists, it's always going to make it here without it having to wait for server data. And then when Relay continues in, as soon as it's fragments that suspend, fragments can suspend and queries can suspend. So if there was a data point in here that didn't exist before, that we haven't fetched, for instance, company, then if we go back here, network, we reload, we do 3G, then it's still gonna have to wait, right? It have to wait for the entire data before. I guess I didn't get the 3G here. Let me do that to make the point extra clear. See, it has to wait. Even though we did all of that work with our fragments and boundaries, it still has to wait. And that's because we've now said that in order to render this component that uses this query, we also need the company data for each user. And at that point, the query is going to see that, oh, you know what, I don't have that company data, so I'm going to suspend here instead. So the trick is to learn to divide your view up in fragments in a way that lets it render as much as possible, if you want that to happen. It looks in cache, it has the user, it can move on to these components, and these will then suspend themselves. And we wrap things as we want here, and if we want to, we add loading states. We could just add nothing here if we wanted to as well, obviously. So for an avatar, we could add a loading state as well. We didn't do that here because we know that we have the data already. So and this works regardless of how deep in your own layout you're in. So it's always going to be either the query that suspends or the component that suspends that uses the fragment. I think that's it for this video. And again, remember, this is a very important technique to understand and to be able to utilize. It's going to be key in making good transitions and having your app feel kind of fast, because you can usually kind of trick the user with showing a bunch of data that they'll focus on while waiting on the other data to come in. So it's a very valuable technique. Okay. That's it for this one. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.